Hey friends, welcome back. It is January, which means if you're an artist or a maker of any kind, then you are probably in the throes of figuring out your fair and festival schedule for the year. I know it's not festival season yet, but it is going to be in a few short months, and festival season, booking those festivals starts in January. Sometimes it actually starts in December. It depends on your market and the exact fairs and festivals that you are looking for. So today we're going to talk about some tips on how to find those festivals and how to evaluate them for your needs. If you're new here, I'm Jen, single mom, artist, and entrepreneur, and this channel is all about building a life that you love. I'm a stained glass artist, so my particular genre fits into both fine art categories and craft and maker categories. So that leaves me a lot of opportunities for fairs and festivals. But just because you have a lot of opportunity doesn't mean it's good opportunity. Let's talk about fairs and festivals. So how do you even start by finding those fairs and festivals? Well, if you do a lot of fine art shows and you're in the United States, you've probably heard of a website called ZAP. It stands for Zapplication. It is a national website where a lot of art fairs use it as a place to post their fair and receive applications. So if your work falls into the art category, Zapplication is a really amazing place for you to start. Now, most of the fairs listed and on Zap are going to be much larger fairs. They're going to be the ones with the bigger booth fees. They're probably all going to have application fees. In fact, I think everything on Zap has an application fee. They're going to require images of your items and an image of your booth without branding. So without your name, without your company, without your logo, your booth without branding. Now, these are things you should have anyway, regardless of the level of fair or festival that you're applying to. You should always have some photographs of your product. You should always have some photographs of your booth setup, because a lot of places are getting pickier about who they take, and they want to see your setup. They want to know that it's professional. They want to know that the products you have are good and well made and presented in a really great way, because presentation matters. So those are things you should have whether you are just a craft maker or you are a fine artist. Zap is going to require those things. So Zapplication is a really good place to start. If, however, your items are more craft-based and are not necessarily going to fit into a fine art genre of fair, then you're probably going to be looking for events that cater more to handmade items. There are lots of groups on Facebook that you can join where you're going to see and hear about information on markets. I'm in at least 10 groups on Facebook that I can think of. And I know. Facebook is for old people, whatever. It's the best place, social media-wise, to find out about events if you are a artist or handmade maker, because there are groups. So I'm in multiple groups. Most of them are centered around Indiana vendors. I would search for vendors, markets, art fairs, art festivals, things of that nature. Another one is just to Google craft fair, craft festival, art fair, art festival. Whatever it is you're looking for, handmade, market, whatever you're looking for, Google's a good place to do that as well, and I would include your city or your state so that you can stay somewhat local. Or if you're interested in going to fairs and festivals that are way out of town, great, go for it. Some cities and states also publish, either online or in little booklets, a calendar of events for the whole year. Specifically, a calendar of festivals for the year. I know the state of Indiana has a festival calendar for the year. You can usually pick it up at like visitor centers, and sometimes local businesses will have it. I can't remember where I picked up my last one. But anyway, just keep your eyes open when you're out and about in the world, and that's a lot of how you'll find out about those events. You also need to network with other handmade makers or other artists, because they'll learn about events that they'll share with you. Word of mouth is honestly how you're going to find the best events, and that requires you to get out in the world and like meet people and have conversations and get to know other artists and other handmade makers so that you can share the wealth. Okay, so let's say you have found a bunch of festivals that you're interested in and you've made a big list. Now you have to evaluate those festivals. You're going to evaluate them in several different ways. Number one is to make sure the event is even real. And I know that sounds crazy, but when it comes to listings you find on Facebook or other social media, sometimes they're scams. The scammers have gotten out of control in the festival world the last few years because they know that there are always people starting new businesses that haven't gotten their feet wet yet and haven't figured out how to evaluate events. So they'll send people their money and the event doesn't exist. So you're out your booth fee for no good reason. Or, even worse, they'll piggyback onto an event that does exist and they'll advertise as the coordinator, get you to send them your money to them, even though they didn't have anything to do with the event. So they're pocketing your money. You think you have a spot at a real valid event, but because you sent money to a person who isn't actually in any way affiliated with that event, you don't. So, these are my tips for evaluating whether or not an event is real. First of all, call the venue where the event is. If the event is real, the venue will have a record of it. They will also know who the coordinator is. Ask. If the venue has no idea what you're talking about, it's not a real event. If it is a real event, double check the dates. Are they the correct dates? The ones you were given? And double check who the coordinator for that event is or the contact person for that event. Because the person contacting the venue is probably also the same person organizing the artists and vendors. So now that you know that the event you found is in fact a legitimate event, the next thing you're going to want to do is consider the costs associated with this event. Now, obviously, your booth fee is one cost, but it's not going to be the complete cost of the event. You need to know if it's out of town. You've got to figure out the cost of gas and getting there. You've got to figure out where you're going to stay. Is that going to be an additional cost? Are they providing any meals? Most aren't, by the way. Most aren't. It's really, really rare to find a festival that's providing lunch or even breakfast. And even the ones that provide breakfast, it's usually a couple dozen donuts, and the first few people that get there get donuts and nobody else does. So if they say they have that they're providing coffee and donuts, take that with a grain of salt. Chances are they're going to run out long before you get anything. Don't count on that, okay? Now, if they tell you we're providing a boxed lunch that we're going to bring around to everybody's tent, awesome. That's a rarity. That's a real, real rarity. I've only done 3 events ever that provided lunch, and I've been doing events for about 5 years. However, that's always an amazing thing when they do provide a lunch or even some snacks. That's amazing. But generally speaking, you're going to have to provide your own food. So that's a cost that you need to consider. I try to always buy, even if it's a multi-day event, I try to buy one of my meals there from one of the food vendors, just because I feel like it's important to support those vendors as well. But that said, it gets really expensive if you're going to be at a multi-day event for 3 days and you have to eat every meal at one of the food trucks. Suddenly your event expense just got pretty hefty. You know, you're adding another $30+ a day just in food costs. So you do need to consider that, because if your booth fee is $500 and now it's out of town, so it's going to cost you another $200 to $300 in a hotel, plus you've got to take care of food for all of that, you need to consider that your actual cost for that event is close to $1,000. All of that matters because that means that you have to sell $1,000 worth of your products before you make a penny. If you have mostly items that are under $20, that is a lot of inventory you have to move before you begin to make a profit. That's a big deal. That said, if your items are all $200, now you only have to move 4 things before you make a profit. So definitely consider that as part of whether or not this show is a good fit. You also want to evaluate whether the audience for this particular show is the right audience for your items. Is it a fine art fair where most people are looking for high dollar items, but you sell nothing but $20 and under items? Sometimes that can work for you, but more often than not, if people are going to a fine art fair, they're expecting to spend substantial amounts of money, and sometimes they turn their nose up at items that are on the low end of cost. On the same token, does this festival cater mostly to handmade craft-styled items? Because if it caters to more items that are a little less expensive, more craft-styled items, then that audience probably isn't going to be expecting to drop $500 on a painting. Those are all things that you have to consider. Is this your audience? Now, if you've been around the whole festival thing at all, then you've heard some talk about MLMs being included in craft fairs. I personally choose not to do craft fairs anymore that I know are going to include non-handmade items. It's not because I have a big issue with MLMs or buy, sell, resale shops. It's not even about that. For me, it is because that I have found that people who value handmade items are my people. People who are going to a festival or a fair expecting to buy resale aren't going to pay my prices. It's not about how much money those festival goers have. It is about what they prioritize. If they value handmade artistic items, then they will pay my prices. If they don't value handmade artistic items, they won't pay my prices. And simply put, if someone is going to an event anticipating buying resale items, they're not anticipating paying the prices that I charge. This is a personal thing. It is not something that you have to follow, but this is my personal philosophy and what I have learned for myself in the state of Indiana over the last 4 to 5 years of doing events. For me, all the items need to be handmade or it is not worth my time. If there's going to be a lot of resale items at an event, it's not my people. And people question me about this all the time. They're like, well, how do you know that the people coming to your event have money? It's not about whether they have money. It is about what they value. So I need a crowd that values handmade, period. That's my audience. You need to know who your audience is. If your audience doesn't care if it's handmade, then you can do any event that you want. My audience cares about handmade. So I'm not going to spend my money and my time sitting at events with items that are not handmade. And one last thing, which is a little controversial, that I like to consider when I am considering a show is, will there be festival rides? I love kids. I have kids. But in my experience, shows with festival rides are not successful shows for me. Because the draw for that festival is the rides. So the place that people are spending their money is on ride tickets. And that's okay. That's fine. If that's the purpose of the festival, then that's how they should be spending their money. But if that is the purpose of the festival, it's not the festival for me. Now, that might not be true for you. If you sell handmade soap, that may be your perfect audience because maybe your primary audience is moms of small kids who are worried about the ingredients in their soap products. So if you sell handmade soaps, handmade lotions that are organic and whatever, maybe that is your audience, but it's not mine. And that's the key, is you have to know your audience. So based on all the factors that you know about that show, will your audience be there? Because if your audience won't be there, it doesn't matter what you pay for it. It doesn't matter how cheap or expensive the booth fee is. Not all shows, not all fairs, not all festivals are for you. And that is okay, because there's somebody that they are for. But you have to know who your audience is. And some of that is trial and error, okay? There is going to be some shows that you're going to be like, oh, this is definitely going to be my audience. And it just simply isn't when you get there. That's okay. Some of this we have to learn by doing, okay? I have picked plenty of shows that I thought were going to be my audience, and they're not. And that's, again, okay. I highly recommend that you take lots and lots of notes of every show that you do, every festival, every fair, about what went well, what went wrong, what all was going on, what do you think were the factors that influenced how your sales were, whether they were good or bad. All of that is stuff you have to evaluate. So, now that you have some ideas on what you're looking for, get out there and book those shows, because it's going to be a great 2024.